Hi there, my name is Nate Ridgway, and welcome to our next vlog on innovative ways to use class time. So the topic we're going to look at today is one that all teachers, I think even beginning ones all the way up to experts, are ones that, or is one that kind of deserves more attention and can seem pretty challenging, and that is how to promote metacognition in your classroom. Now, with all of that being said, metacognition is a really important skill for students for a whole bunch of reasons, and I think that kind of why we're looking at this here in this vlog specifically is just because we want our students to become complex thinkers, and we want them to become really smart, critical thinking human beings who can eventually learn for themselves. And that's kind of the whole purpose, as you'll soon find out here, behind metacognition. Now, we're going to absolutely in this vlog be looking at how to do this in class time specifically, but that's kind of what I just mentioned there. Those kind of descriptions are kind of like the three areas we're going to kind of attack metacognition from today. So again, we're going to kind of look at mastery and how we can develop students' mastery of contents or content objectives or those kind of things. How they can take on more of a heavy kind of critical thinking load as opposed to the teacher. I've always heard teachers say, like the ones who I've always admired, say, I shouldn't have to be intellectually working harder than my students. And here you're going to absolutely see that that is the case, that we're trying to make that happen. And then also, our third area that we're going to look at is how to get our students to establish, update, and then reflect on personal goals that they make. And again, goals, whether they be academic or behavioral, can apply to any content area or any grade level. Okay, all the way up from pre-K for us here in the United States, all the way up to the college and secondary level. So there's a whole bunch of reasons. Again, there's so much research that's out there on metacognition. The two that I'm going to point to specifically that kind of inform my practice are some of the meta-analysis studies that have been done by Schneider and Presley back in 1989, and what their kind of studies did is they looked at basically how does metacognition actually influence the way that students make and decide upon certain learning approaches. And you're going to kind of see here that that kind of permeates this entire blog and discussion that we're about to have. And then second, kind of the other emphasis that you'll see us pushing here, and this comes from Debbie Silver, is that we're trying to get students through metacognition to try to take on the intellectual thinking and action load in the classroom as opposed to us teachers. And again, that's because we want them learning, not necessarily us learning. As fun it is as sometimes to learn alongside of our students. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to take a few minutes and we're going to use those kind of like broad three areas, these three strategies, and we're going to focus on how you can actually use class time to make this happen. Now, be aware, Classtime absolutely is an app built on assessment, and that means that it is absolutely perfect for us being able to look at students' content and skill mastery in a whole bunch of different ways. So one of the most powerful ways that you can do this, like in a very simple way with Classtime, just to kind of get your feet wet in the process, is to, and this is something I've done with my blocks, and I thought I would show you an example here, is to give students a duplicate question set at the beginning of a class period and then at the end of a class period. And what this does, okay, is kind of a whole combination of things. So first, like, you will obviously want to tell students that this is kind of like a pre-test, or kind of like, I just want to kind of like get a baseline for what your knowledge is. And then by the time that they've gone through the lesson, they know that as they're kind of going through the day's activities or the day's lessons in particular, they're kind of on a hunt for that information that you did in that warm-up. And then by the time that the exit ticket rolls around and the students take their second attempt at it, you can see here that my world history blocks that did this did much better, at least on the first two objectives. Now on the third objective, you can see here, again, just broadly, they still struggled. And as I went down and I broke down the data in Classtime, and this is again why Classtime is amazing, because like you can get this data really quickly, is I can go and I can say, okay, yeah, there was like something like 90% or 80% growth on students being able to identify the triangle trade. Perfect. Or being able to define the philosophy of mercantilism. Again, a really broad spectrum of growth from 26% to 94%. And then again, as we keep going down here, we start to see that again, and this is important, again, measuring mastery. In this example, my students didn't improve on the third one. And so actually getting down to the nitty gritty, we can kind of see that, okay, clearly with students, they weren't able to take the lesson that we did, and they weren't able to understand or see how, okay, going through the lesson, what have I learned about how the parts of mercantilism work here? And so again, that's not only helpful for the students themselves, but it's also helpful for the teacher as well in knowing to go back how to teach. Now, if you'd like to see the lesson that I did this with students in which I gave them a exit ticket and an entry ticket that were both duplicate, you are more than welcome to. You can just click right here and the link is there, and off you go. Now, again, kind of the whole point here is that this strategy is kind of based around the idea that we're getting students to discard the less important information that is in the lesson. So for example, with me teaching a history class, there's obviously a lot of information in history that my students have to be able to kind of parse their way through. And what they then get to do is they can kind of decide, okay, this is the material that I really need to focus on. And they're kind of thinking about how can I file things into different file folders, and ones that I do need and ones that I don't need. And that's a really, really important skill. Again, when people go off into the world, there's important information and there's not as important information. I also would encourage you, if you feel like that this is a first step that you can take when you actually give your students kind of a duplicate warm-up and exit ticket, you can do this over, for example, the beginning of the week and the end of the week, or the beginning of the month and the end of the month. The possibilities are really, really strong with kind of this idea of duplicating question sets and having them go back. So strategy number 2. Student-centered reflection. We want our students, again, to become the intellectual weightlifters in our classroom as compared to us. And we are going to try here in kind of a whole bunch of ways to have Classtime help us do this, again, to kind of help them take on the burden of thinking and working in the room. So first things first, there's obviously a very easy way that if you're looking to do this for the first time, that you can do it in Classtime. And that is, there's this button at the very end that says Session Reflection that you can enable with any of your sessions. And what that does, very, very simply, is it turns on these 3 questions that students answer. So did you learn something new? Would you like to practice this topic again? And how do you feel about your learning progress? Now again, those are very broad areas, and this could be, again, a nice, easy way to start. What I do recommend, though, if you think that this is going to be your first time that you're going to give your students this kind of reflective questions, don't just throw it at them. You want to make sure that you are modeling for students, actually oh wait, okay, when I sit down and I answer this, what do we mean by did you learn something new? Do we mean a random fact that you encountered? Do we mean a skill that you encountered in the lesson? What do we actually mean there? And so even though it sounds silly, you have to model for your students how you want them to be metacognitive in the room. Again, so would you like to practice this topic again? Does that mean they, again, when you're helping students answer these questions, does that mean that we repeat the whole lesson over again? Does that mean that we do the same topic and objectives but with different examples this time? Again, you kind of have to work through this thinking with your students before, for example, I would give this to my students for the first time. Now, when I did it with my particular classes, what I did was I used actual question sets in Classtime rather than this option that you can click in Classtime itself. And so I have 2 groups of kids. I have a younger group of students at the school where I teach, and I have an older group. And so what I did is I developed kind of 2 question sets, one for each of them, to kind of start this practice of having them think and kind of take on the workload. And so for my younger students, I just used these questions. This topic was easy or hard to learn because blank. What helped me learn blank was blank. I can do better blank if I blankety blank blank blank. My teacher or classmates helped me learn blank because blank. Okay, so again, like you'll notice that a lot of these questions for younger students are focused on like the immediate classroom environment inside the lesson itself. For my older students, you'll start to see that some of the questions start to become a little bit more hypothetical. And again, that's because that kind of like abstract kind of conceptual thinking is kind of more tailored to where their brains are developmentally. So for my older students, here's the questions they had. This topic was easy or challenging for me because blank. What helped me to learn most easily was blank. And then here's where it starts to get a little bit more hypothetical. If I think about my learning, what I can do to learn more easily is blank. How might family and friends support my learning is blank. Okay, and so again, like we're kind of now starting to think like outside necessarily the classroom walls. If you would like to use these question sets to start to practice this kind of metacognitive load taking for your students, I've got them right here for you, and you're more than welcome. Please take them and copy and steal them. It's fun to share stuff that other people can actually make use of. And I guess kind of the thing that I do want to reemphasize here as we kind of go on to a related area, but not kind of down the same avenue that we've been going, is that as you're promoting your students, whether it's with mastery that we just talked about a few minutes ago earlier, or whether it's with the kind of taking on that intellectual weight load, we want to develop this as a continual practice for students that they utilize throughout their educational careers. Like this isn't like a one lesson off kind of thing. It's like literally teaching students how to learn and how to think is like our main purpose as educators. And so like this isn't like something like, oh, we'll try this one day and then like, you know, we set it aside for like 3 months. For me, like I've learned that getting my students to practice metacognition is something that we do almost every single day, whether that be, you know, like an entry-exit ticket thing or questions like these that are embedded inside the lessons themselves. It's kind of up to you. But with all that being said, let's go to our third area, goal setting. Now, this one necessarily, you may not, like, Classtime may not come to mind at first when you think about goal setting, but if you don't do it through Classtime, you're actually missing a really, really kind of interesting way to tackle the idea of having your students set these long-term aims and goals that they want to achieve. And the reason why is because we're going to almost use Classtime here as like a database for their prompts where they can create them, you can gather them as an educator, and then students can return to them and update them. Okay, and so what we're trying to do here, okay, and if you've not heard of SMART goals, this has kind of been a pretty long established thing in the educational world, is that when I, like, and other teachers, typically when they have their students set goals, is that they want them to be SMART, and that's an acronym, meaning specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. And the idea here is then that when all of this kind of goal is crafted by students, let's say, for example, you're having a student with a behavior goal that they are to turn in, 95% of their assignments during the semester, and to do that, let's see, so was that specific? Yes. Homework assignments. Was it measurable? Yeah. Was it attainable? Think so, 95%. Is it relevant to that student? We hope so. And was it time bound? Yeah, we said by the end of the semester. And so you can kind of see there, I used like SMART like as a checklist. And what we're hoping to have students do is kind of return to that goal and reflect upon their progress. And there is so much literature out there on how to have your students make SMART goals. If you would like to use the presentation that I made to have students make them, it is right here for you. It's got the whole modeling process as well as a place where students can go and make them themselves. But now let's go ahead and kind of show how Classtime can actually help your students make goals that they can come back and reflect on. So modeling, again, like you're going to have to take some time, and if students aren't familiar with SMART goals and this kind of whole process, you're going to have to take some time and actually show them how to do it. And so what I did, okay, is I used just a very basic question set, and it said, write your SMART goal and the answer blank below. And then I gave, SMART again, what it means. And then I also put in a model, and this is really important. So for example, I will attend the University of Indianapolis, go Greyhounds, and graduate with a bachelor's degree in history in 2025. Okay, and again, I'm using that like add more details here part in class time to actually give them that scaffolding to succeed. Okay, now once you actually have your students make their goals, the wonderful thing about class time is that gathering them is the easiest thing in the world, and that's because again, like they just submit their goals into class time like they would any like long extended response question. Uh, the one thing that you will want to remember this about this though is that because we're trying to have students return to these goals, you want to make sure that the allow only one attempt per question setting is turned off. Okay, and specifically which one that is we'll go up here, right here. Allow only one attempt per question. We do not want to have this one check marked. We want to make sure we have that one turned off. Okay, because otherwise they will not be able to get back to their goals, and that will be a problem. All right, sharing. Okay, there are conflicting studies out there about whether or not students should share their goals. Obviously, you're gathering them as a teacher, which is kind of in a way sharing, but I'm talking about like having students share their goals with each other. Some researchers say that simply the fact that students sharing them and having peers like be like, oh wow, that's really cool, actually gives the students the psychological reward of achieving them, and so like you're actually less likely to achieve them if you share them because you kind of like have gotten that like social satisfaction of I've already done it. Other teachers and researchers say like, well, actually what you're creating there is a support system for students to be able to go then and actually achieve those goals once they've shared them with their peers. I'm not going to wade into that debate because I think there might be a little bit of merit to both sides, but I would recommend that if you feel like you do want to share, what students' goals are with the class and each other, again, that's completely possible from the teacher dashboard, and you can easily do that just by clicking on the individual student responses. Now, returning to goals is, again, kind of the ultimate end game of what we're doing here. Okay, so we're looking, again, for students to actually come back to and return to these things and thinking about their past and future challenges, that what component parts of these things kind of might have gotten in their way. And again, like depending on the audience that you have, the prompts and kind of the thinking that you have students to do with these kind of SMART goals is obviously going to really differ. So for example, if you've got really younger students, like you want to provide them a lot of scaffolding in terms of them like thinking about, okay, like what made achieving my goal difficult? Like that can be a really tough question for second and third and fourth year students, and so what we're again kind of trying to do here is kind of creating open-ended prompts and kind of scaffolding them in a way for our students to practice reflecting about their goals. And so you can see here what I've done is I actually had my students go back and return to those SMART goals that they submitted, and they had to, for my upper level students, and they're a little bit older that I've done this with them, they kind of had to think about kind of these three questions, and they returned to them about 2 or 3 times in a particular semester. So right here, the part of the goal that I was easy, or I think will be easy, so again, like you can see there's kind of a pre and a post aspect to it, was and is blank, because blank. The part of this goal that was challenging, or I think will be challenging, was or is blank, because blank. Or how or have or might my family and friends support my achievement of my goal. Now, of course, there's there are literally hundreds and hundreds of questions that you could ask students about their SMART goals, and kind of like breaking down the points of like, okay, what's the first step I'm going to have to take to achieve my SMART goal? Or what part of it do I think that I'm going to need somebody else's support on? The whole point here is that we're not trying to have these goals just exist out in space and like we don't actually break them down into parts. We're trying to think about them in a critical way that kind of helps students understand that we're kind of playing the long-term game. But if you'd like to use this question set as well, the SMART goal question set, I've also included a Classtime link to that question set as well. Okay, so that is the end of like actually where my blog post goes to. But again, just to kind of help recap here, because I know that this has been probably one of my lengthier vlogs to kind of again, discuss what we've actually talked about. We've kind of have focused on three things: how we can get students to focus on mastery rather than just straight up performance in the classroom. Okay, so again, like we did that through, similar entry and exit tickets. Okay, the helping them focus on the important information at the time. The next thing we did is having students take on the intellectual weight load of our classroom, and again, having them do that either by like the session reflection questions, or helping them do some different prompts in the room to help them kind of take on that burden of thinking. And then the last thing that we focused on was goal setting. And again, kind of looking at those long-term SMART goals and helping them return to them multiple times and think about them in some pretty critical ways. So until next time, this is Nate Ridgway, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.